Hello. I wanted to follow up an article I wrote 2 years ago, and I think it will be 2 years by the time I've edited this together, because it was the 21st of October, and it's now the 20th here, in this time and space, and I'm sure by the time this actually is up on the YouTube, it will be the 21st. It regarded Judy Finnegan, of Richard and Judy fame, who had come under backlash from the feminists because she had defended Ched Evans' right to continue working after being released from prison. And when she was defending him, she said that whilst what had happened was unpleasant, it wasn't a violent rape. And the feminists were very angry that she was suggesting that one rape could be worse than another. And a similar argument had been made when they attacked Richard Dawkins, when he talked about his own experiences of being abused as a child, and said it was only mildly uncomfortable but nothing serious. And the feminists were aggrieved at that as well, because he was suggesting that one form of child abuse could be worse than another. They said that it was trivializing, whereas I felt that it would be trivializing to say the opposite, to say that they're all equally bad. It would be trivializing the really serious cases. I used the example in the article is if you applied the same logic to food poisoning, then the very fact that some food poisoning can be fatal means that you can't say that you had a mild dose of food poisoning. So you could say, how dare you suggest that some forms of food poisoning are less bad than other forms of food poisoning? Just because you managed to get away with 24 hours of vomiting and diarrhea doesn't mean food poisoning is okay. And that is what you're saying if you say that your experience of food poisoning was not that bad compared with other forms of food poisoning. Right? Don't invalidate the victims of all food poisoning, including those who die of listeria or salmonella, by saying your bout of food poisoning wasn't fatal, you food poisoning apologist. And as I would say, of course, the exact opposite would be trivializing. It would be trivializing to say that there aren't milder forms. Otherwise, you would start to treat the really serious cases as being like the mild forms. See? Anyway, I felt it was a piece of rhetoric that was being thrown in to gum up the works of having a serious conversation, which of course is what they wanted to prevent. Anyway, because this was about Ched Evans, it did mean I did some research into the Ched Evans case, and it did look to me like no rape had taken place at all. It was in this sort of category of rape that had only sort of like started to be talked about, which was the too drunk to consent. And I remember seeing this in the press, that it was being reported that if you have sex with somebody when they're too drunk to consent, that could be considered to be rape. And I thought, this opens a dangerous opportunity for miscarriages of justice to take place. We've all had sex when we're drunk at some point, or at least most of us had sex whilst we're drunk. Very few of us would claim that we were raped, and there isn't a clear definition of what too drunk to consent is. So anyone who wakes up after having sex and thinks, God, I wish I didn't do that, could turn around and accuse the person they had sex with of raping them. I thought it opened up a dangerous can of worms. So that's why I'm following up now, you see, because we've seen how that played out now. We've just seen Ched Evans go for retrial, and this time he was found not guilty. So it really is time for a follow-up to that article. Because the fact that Ched Evans was found not guilty proved not to be the end of it, did it? Feminists are now up in arms that the sexual history of the complainant was used in the case. And they said this sets a dangerous precedent that sexual histories are going to be used in future cases. Actually, no precedent has been set. There's always been in law the proviso regarding whether sexual history can be used, that it could be used if it was relevant to the case, and it was clearly was relevant to the case. In this particular instance, there were features of the complainant's known consensual sexual encounters which directly paralleled the sex that Ched Evans described, including the phrase "fuck me harder" or variants of "fuck me harder." I think one of the really, really crucial pieces of evidence was that it wasn't the first time that she'd had a intimate encounter and then not been able to remember it the next day. And according to the report of her previous partner on that particular instance, she said, "I can't remember what we did last night." And he was surprised that she couldn't remember because she didn't seem that drunk to him. So it wasn't unknown for her to have intimate encounters while not appearing to be all that drunk, and then the next day say that she couldn't remember what happened. So as that was the basis upon which the Crown Prosecution Service decided that Ched Evans and indeed McDonald should be charged with rape, it's quite key that the same features had occurred in sexual encounters that were known to be consensual. So the feminists are wrong when they're saying that a dangerous precedent had been set and that they shouldn't use sexual history. They should have used sexual history because it was relevant to the case. And no precedent has been set because that already existed in law, that you could bring up sexual history if it was relevant. If it could be proven that it was relevant to the case, then it could be brought forward and used in evidence. Meanwhile, whilst the feminists are making those sort of noises, a different set of noises has been heard from sort of the other camp, if you like, from the camp of Ched Evans supporters, that are saying, well, she clearly lied and she should be prosecuted for lying, and she should suffer the same sort of inconvenience that he did. She should spend 5 years in jail and have her name spread through the media for lying. Fact is that in any rape case, if a defendant is found not guilty, it doesn't prove that a rape didn't happen. What it means is that it is not beyond reasonable doubt that a rape did happen, and therefore he is found not guilty because he has not been proven guilty. Doesn't mean that a rape didn't take place, just that it can't be proved beyond reasonable doubt that it did. However, and one of the things I've noticed about the arguments made by both these camps, both the feminists who sort of claim to be defending her, and those that want her to suffer for lying, neither of them actually addressing the point that she never claimed to be raped in the first place. She never said that she was raped. So, if she wasn't raped, she's not lying, because she never said she was. What she said is that she woke up in a strange hotel, couldn't remember how she got there, and that she'd wet the bed. And she thought she might have been robbed, and she thought she might have been drugged. Now, there was no evidence that she'd been drugged at all. There was some cocaine in the system, but she took that voluntarily. She didn't claim that she'd had sex. The way that the investigators found out that she had sex is they found the hotel room that she'd spent the night in had been booked in the name of Ched Evans, so that's how they got to speak to Evans and McDonald. They learnt from them that she'd had sex that night, and then they took it upon themselves to treat it as a rape case. And that's interesting, you see, because the feminists, you'd think if they were defending her, they'd mention the fact that she never said that she'd been raped. Because those that have been pursuing her and harassing her caused her to have her identity changed and be given witness protection, all that sort of thing. If the feminists were defending her, you'd think they'd mention the fact that she never claimed that she was raped in the first place. That's really a key part of her defence, but they're not mentioning that. It's very interesting. It's like they're not really defending her at all, they're just defending the policy. The policy in question being that drunken sex should be treated as though it was rape. Clearly the court doesn't agree that when one is drunk one is incapable of giving consent necessarily. The police, on the other hand, seem to be some ideological influences over the police policy. The same ideological influences didn't seem to apply to the judge or the jury in this particular case. This is going to lead to a terrible attrition rate. And then the feminists were pointing to the terrible attrition rate and saying, look how many rapists are getting off. Now, there is certainly a case to be made for pursuing justice where false allegations are concerned. Fogg did an estimate based on the Brown-Miller statistic of 2% of rape allegations are false, which of course is the lowest estimate there is and one with no validity at all. He said even if we assume that to be the case, we'd still find that 14 out of 15 false rape allegations go unpunished. So I do have some sympathy for the people saying that, she should be put in jail as well. Or at least that she should be on trial for perverting the course of justice, which is actually what you would have to do, because the mere fact that he's been found not guilty does not mean that she is guilty of perverting the course of justice, if indeed she had made that claim. But since she didn't make that claim, in this case, you found the wrong culprit anyway. The actual culprit is the CPS and policies recommended by the CPS and the Sexual Offences Act of 2003, which opened up the possibilities for prosecutions being made against innocent people. Even if it had been the case that she had perverted the course of justice, she's just an individual. She's an individual that's older now as well. She's in her mid-20s. One would expect that her behaviour is probably more responsible now. Whereas the Crown Prosecution Service and the police and the advisors to the police and the Sexual Offences Act of 2003 are all structural and are in a position to damage far more lives than she is. An article was published in the Mirror in December of 2014, so it was after I wrote my article. And I had wanted to come back to it at the time. So it was the Ched Evans effect. Police reveal surge in drunk rape reports following coverage of footballers' release from prison. Police forces have experienced more than 50% increase in rape reports in the past 3 months. More women are reporting being raped while they are too drunk to consent, following the furore surrounding footballer Ched Evans, the Daily Mirror can reveal. A Wales international was released from prison last month after serving half of a 5-year sentence for raping a young woman in a Premier Inn hotel room. Evans admitted he had sex with the victim, but denied the offence, claiming it was consensual. In fact, it was only because Evans and McDonald had admitted to having sex with the victim that anyone knew that it had to take place at all. The fact that the miscarriage of justice had very likely happened was the fact, of course, that McDonald was cleared of the same offence under the same conditions. A jury didn't believe him and decided the waitress, then aged 19, was too drunk to consent. The 25-year-old has continued to protest his innocence since being released, and the topic of his future has dominated headlines for the past few months. A Mirror investigation has found the publicity appeared to have contributed to a recent surge in reports of rape. Forces up and down the country have experienced an increase in the number of victims coming forward in August, September and October. The 11 police forces who handed over their latest statistics reported an average rise of more than 50%. Police officers, crime commissioners and charities believe the coverage of Evans' case has encouraged victims, particularly those raped while too drunk to consent, to report their ordeal. Vera Baird, police and crime commissioner in Northumbria, where rape reports have tripled, said the Ched Evans case has undoubtedly contributed to the recent spike. Yeah, one feels there actually may be a danger that is opened up by crime commissioners, because they're elected officials. unlike the old police authorities, which means that they can get elected on the grounds of appeal to public opinion. Which you may sound, oh, that sounds good, that sounds like democracy. But we're talking about law, and we know that where the public is concerned, appeals to emotion are very powerful, particularly appeals to threat narratives. So there is actually something to be concerned about having elected officials in charge of legal policy. However, that didn't happen to 2011, so that's not relevant to the Ched Evans case. It's just something to be aware of in long term, I think. She said, people know in a way they didn't before that these cases do go to court and do result in convictions. As part and parcel of that, people are now getting bigger sentences. The Ched Evans case has undoubtedly played a role. And there's some graphs here. Number of student rapes in Greater Manchester has doubled there. In Northumbria, number of rapes reported, it has almost trebled there. And then a 50% rise in other places. South Yorkshire Police has seen almost a 90% increase in rape reports, while cases are up more than 50% in the West Midlands. In Greater Manchester, police have seen a particular increase in alcohol-fuelled rapes. Detective Inspector Damien Simpson from the Forces Specialist Sexual Offences Unit said, "Unfortunately, we've dealt with many an incident whereby two young people have met on an alcohol-fuelled night out. One thing has led to another, and the next morning we're arresting somebody for rape." The implication is two people are drunk. One thing has led to another, which is kind of how sex happens, really, isn't it? One thing leading to another. Well, in fact, actually, it's the way that everything happens. Everything happens for one thing leading to another. It's called cause and effect. But never mind. That's just his phraseology. But yeah, there's been an escalation of intimacy, let's say, and obviously it resulted in sex. And then the next morning they're arresting somebody for rape. It's very interesting what he says there. What he says there doesn't imply that one person has particularly taken advantage of the other, just that one thing has led to another, and they're both alcohol-fuelled. His colleague, Detective Sergeant Claire Fiffian, says high-profile cases such as Evans and Jimmy Savile had an effect. Jimmy Savile's completely irrelevant to this. I don't know why she's bringing Jimmy Savile up. Well, I do know why, because Jimmy Savile started opening up the idea of historical rape cases being brought forward, but she's conflating two completely different things there. It's worth bearing in mind that the two things she's conflated there are women and children. So just bear that in mind. Have a think about that. She's conflated the idea of sex with women with sex with children. It's almost an admission there that she's infantilizing women, isn't it? Obviously not deliberate, but quite telling nevertheless. They seem to have given victims the confidence that their case will be dealt with seriously, she said. Whether the rape happened today or 30 years ago, we will investigate. The spike has led GMP to launch a new hard-hitting campaign entitled "Drinking is not a crime, rape is." One of the patterns we started to notice was rapes where the victim wakes up in the morning and they can't really remember what happened to them, or they wake up to find someone having sex with them, said DS Fiffian. A lot of the time we're arresting young men who have never been in trouble with the police before. Just going to repeat that line because I think this is really significant. This is really where you feel there may be a cause for concern. A lot of the time we're arresting young men who've never been in trouble with the police before. The offenders may have been drinking themselves, but in a court of law that isn't a defence. What if they're too drunk to consent too? What if they're both too drunk to consent? Then who's to blame? The increase in too drunk to consent rapes has encouraged several police forces to launch similar campaigns recently. Hampshire police found that nearly half of all rape victims knew their attacker. Launching a campaign called Don't Cross the Line, DCI Tara Williams said, "We are targeting young men as statistically they are more likely to commit an offence." I think she means she's targeting with the campaign, I hope. Otherwise there's a word for that. It's criminal profiling, otherwise. In fact, it's still criminal profiling because it's seeding the idea in people's heads that the man is necessarily the offender. So it's not seeding in people's heads the idea that it could be the woman that's the offender. So when you're trying to make an interpretation of something that's happened, the fact that all the publicity about this particular phenomenon has the men as the perpetrator means when you're trying to form a narrative out of a collection of experiences, the narrative that you are being provided with informs the way you interpret the events. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people are thinking all men are the perpetrators, then they're more likely to interpret events as a man being a perpetrator. Whether you are 16 and getting drunk at a friend's party or 28 and heading to town for a few drinks, the message is simple. Cross the line and it's rape. Katie Russell from Rape Crisis confirmed the charity had seen an increase in cases since the Ched Evans saga began. "I think overall it is positive," she said. "There's now so much more interest in sexual violence. We're getting requests from people to work with us we've never had before. Around 1.2 million visited our website in October, more than we've ever had before. I think all of this has brought it out to the open and raised awareness. People are much more tuned in, or more whipped up into a state of hysteria, one or the other." PCC Vera Baird also welcomed the increase in rape reporting as a positive development. "I think it's a very good thing more people are coming forward because there's been a misunderstanding about how damaging rape or sexual abuse can be," she said. "It's easy for people to think she was drunk, it was a quick bit of sex, and he thought nothing of it. What difference does it make? These cases have really brought home how damaging it is." Alright, it may have brought home how damaging casual sex can be, but just because it's damaging doesn't mean it's rape necessarily. And when she says that it's really positive that the amount of reported rape has gone up, she's assuming that they're all genuine. There's two other things that are damaging that she's not considering. One is damaging to women. If you can attribute any unpleasant experience to other people so that you don't accept your own responsibility for factors that may have led to an incident, then it takes away your sense of agency. Makes you feel more helpless. Makes you feel more scared as well, because you're not able to say, "Oh, yeah, that's why I shouldn't have." You can't take control over your own life. And of course, it's also very damaging for men to be falsely accused. So the rise in reported rapes would only be positive if the rise represented actual rape. But given that they've introduced this ambiguous definition of rape that allows mere regretted drunken sex to be misinterpreted as rape, that isn't positive at all. And that means that this rise represents a very dangerous and life-damaging element into people's personal lives. So if you're looking for who to blame in the Ched Evans prosecution, don't look at the claimant. She never claimed to be raped in the first place. It's not really her fault. If you're looking for people to blame, and those who will be to blame in other cases where young men are falsely prosecuted and young women are encouraged to see themselves as victims, then you need to look at groups like Rape Crisis and Women Against Rape, and people within the police like DS Fiffian and DCI Tara Williams, and anyone that assumes that a rise in reports of rape is necessarily a positive thing, because they'll ruin many more lives than just one person. Alright, before I go, can't really be that in depth in a video, so I'm going to recommend some books. Read Why Rape Culture is a Dangerous Myth by Luke Gittos. Good book. Not to forget to mention, of course, the old stalwarts that I recommend constantly, which is Ceasefire by Kathy Young and The Morning After by Katie Royce. And in reference to the Ched Evans case in particular, I suggest you look at the article by the Secret Barrister, which I will put as the first link down there, so that you can find it easily. But it's quite good at debunking myths that are being spread by both sides. After all, the best awareness raiser of all is your own curiosity, and this is just one blind man reporting the nature of elephants. Other opinions are available. Cheerio. One of my little addendums here. I'm going to see this addendum actually at the end, where addendum's supposed to go. I was just doing the citations, because, after the end of the video, I feel I need to do little citations to the low bar. And I thought, I'll have a look at one of those, find an example article of the feminist outrage. And a name popped up in it, a name that I've just read in that Ched Evans Effect article in the Mirror. Vera Baird, the Northumbria Police and Crime Commissioner, played a large role in changing the law in the 90s. Told BBC Radio 4's Today programme, the only difference between a clear conviction of Mr. Evans in 2012 and the absolute refusal of him having any leave to appeal at that time and his acquittal now is that he has called some men to throw discredit on the woman's sexual reputation. That, I think, is pouring prejudice in, which is exactly what used to happen before the law in 1999 stopped the admission of previous sexual history in order to show consent. We've gone back, I'm afraid, probably about 30 years. Bear in mind, I've just mentioned that no precedent has been set. Nothing has changed in the law to allow those big pieces of previous history to come forward. She's the Commissioner of Police, remember? She's the Commissioner of Police. She's Crime Commissioner. She's the Crime Commissioner of Northumbria. Northumbria that had the number of rapes reported treble. And she's quite clearly ideologically motivated. And as I say, she was elected to an elected position. So, yeah, there's a serious danger in having crime commissioners being elected by the public who are easily swayed by emotive arguments and threat narratives. I was interested to discover that the name Vera Baird I've actually seen before. I didn't really notice. Do you remember this set of adverts here that came out just before, I think it was New Year, on domestic violence, and particularly non-violent violence, or rather non-physical violence, i.e. violence that we wouldn't consider to be violent before. Let's have a look at the corner of just one of those, shall we? I think I might have to do some further investigations into Vera Baird. I think she might be a very dangerous woman.